This is to introduce people to the notion of views versus images when using our X-ray tech note that gets imported into our reports, because this can be confusing for technologists and for radiologists. What is the issue? Well, the techs, as part of our new tech note, are supposed to provide us with a number of views that the billing department will then use to bill insurers, because that's how CPT codes work. So that, shoulder 3 view gets billed maybe differently than shoulder 2 view, that sort of thing. And when we say views, what we really mean are the number of types of projections. So for example, an AP and a lateral and an oblique are all different types of projection. And of course, even for oblique views, we'll come up to this later, a right lateral oblique versus a left lateral oblique, those are different projections. But repeating a study, for example, let's say you don't see an area well, so they retake the picture, or the view is oblique and they have to retake it. That doesn't count as an extra view. That's just another image that was taken, another attempt at the same view. Finally, the number of images that we report or can report, not necessary to report in your actual dictation, but is reported by the technologists. When you say images, what we're referring to is sort of the number of image files that are available. And I'll show you what that means as well. And that has more to do with making sure that you've seen all the things that were actually taken, rather than for billing purposes. I mentioned this already. Extra images. Sometimes if you repeat a view, even a swimmer's view, if it wasn't ordered, if it was just taken because we don't see the C7, T1 level very well, technically is not a separate view. That's simply essentially like a repeat. So here are some examples of things that come up. Here's a femur. The femur is very long and you can't fit it on one image. So even though this is supposed to be an AP and lateral view of the femur, 4 pictures are taken, 4 images, 4 image files. But really there are only 2 projections. There's the AP projection, which are these 2 images, and there's the lateral projection, which are those 2 images. So this is an example where the tech should report, and we should report, that there is a 2-view study. We shouldn't be billing it as a 4-view study because that's technically sort of overbilling. But there are 4 images. Similarly, so here's an example of, this is a little bit more confusing. There are 3 image files, so it says images 3, and but there are only 2 views. That is, there's an AP and a lateral. It's the AP is this and this together make 1 view of the lower leg, or the tibia and fibula, and this together form 1 view, 1 lateral view of the lower leg. But there are 3 images. This image includes 2 pictures, but it's really 1 image file. So 3 images, 2 views. This is one that technologists get most confused about, and it is tricky. So the pelvis is almost a unique thing because we tend to get unilateral images over 1 hip, but we also get the whole pelvis. And so this can be reported in 2 different ways. Either way works from a billing perspective. Either you can say 3 views, that is an AP view of the pelvis, frontal view of the hip, and a lateral view of the hip, or you can just count the number of views, 1, 2, 3, 3 views. Either of those is appropriate. This is 4 images though, and not 4 views, because they did a repeat of the lateral view. They didn't include the distal stem. Since these are the same projection but just repeated for the purposes of including the whole thing, that doesn't count as an extra view to be billed. It's just an extra image. Okay. Similarly, this cervical spine has a lateral view, 1 kind of a right-sided oblique, a left-sided oblique. So just because it says oblique once doesn't mean that this is 1 view. These are 2 different views. So 1, 2, 3, and then a frontal view, 4. These were attempts at the frontal view initially taken that were not good and therefore were repeated. So there were 6 image files obtained, but really only 4 views for billing. A flexion and extension view do count as separate views. In this case, they did a repeat standard lateral projection as an attempt to get down, look swimmer's view, to get down at these lower bodies. So we didn't count this as an extra view. It was simply an extra image taken that was essentially like a repeat of the lateral. So you have a lateral, frontal, and then two kinds of a flexion and extension view, which count as separate kinds of views. Not to belabor the point, but again, a swimmer's view, if added only for the purposes of clarifying an area that wasn't seen well, doesn't count. If they order a swimmer's view, that does count, but this otherwise would not count. I mentioned that both oblique views, each of them are different projections, and each count as a separate view. So the other issue that comes up is bilateral studies and how to report that. The bottom line is you have to report per side. For instance, if you have bilateral knees and 4 views of each side, and you just say that there are 4 views, it's unclear to the billing people if that means that there were 2 views obtained of each knee or if there are 4 views of each knee, and I'll show you that. So we ask the text to put the word each afterwards. So they should put laterality bilateral, and then views, they should say 4 each. Okay, I'll show you that. And then hip and pelvis is a little bit more confusing, but I'll show you that as well. So, and this is a typical 4-view knee study that we have, 4 view of each side. All right, and so it's important to use each, because if they say 4, then and it's bilateral, they might just bill 2 views of each side, which is underbilling. Notice that the 2 frontal projections, the AP and the flex PA views that we have of the knees, are each included in a single image file. So the number of images on this study is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And also the same thing with the merchant views. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But the number of views is 4 of each side. This is 1, 2, 3, 4 of this side, 1, 2, 3, 4 of the other side. Same thing with the feet. In this case, both feet are included on one image, but they each count as a separate view of each side. So 1, 2, 3 views of this side, 1, 2, 3 views of that side, 3 views each, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 image files. This doesn't really matter how you bill it, but technically it would be 1 view of each side. Now the pelvis and hips issue, I mentioned this earlier. AP pelvis and 2 views of the left hip, or just say 3 views, either is fine for billing. What gets confusing is bilateral. So a lot of times I see technologists report this as 3 views each, 3 of each side, bilateral hip study. Technically that's not right. This is not a view of the hip, this is a view of the pelvis. So either of these options works. You can either say there are 5 views, or you can say pelvis there's 1 view and hips there are 2 views of each side. Either one works, and in this case there are 5 images as well. This is a commonly confused thing for the technologists, and I'm often providing feedback to them about this. Let's say there was no pelvis, then it would just be 2 views of each hip. Okay, and then finally this comment about multiple projections or views on one image file or cassette, we would used to say. Just an example. So here's a toe, 3 different projections obtained on a single image file. This is still a 3-view study, but just 1 image available in impacts in the PACS system. And then in this case, you get 2 views of the wrist on each of these image files. So there are 2 images, but there are 4 projections or 4 views. Okay, sorry I went kind of quickly. I hope that that's not too confusing. Thank you very much.